Hello and welcome back to my channel. Junk journaling is becoming increasingly popular and I thought you might like to see how I make mine. It does what it says on the tin, in the fact that all the pages are junk from old books, leftover scrap paper, papers and any other thing that you can find lying about. So I'm going to make the cover of the junk journal from an old hardback book. I'm going to take the dust jacket off and discard that because we don't need it anymore. And the first thing I'm going to do is to measure the actual text block. And this one is 3¼ centimetres. So I'm just going to make a note on a piece of scrap paper. Because we'll need that later. The next thing we need to do is to take a sharp craft knife and cut the text block out. Now I know a lot of people have a problem with this. It's very easy to slip and actually cut through the spine, and we don't want to do that. It's not too much of an issue in this case because I'm going to be covering the whole of the spine and the book with scrapbooking papers. But to avoid it, the easiest way to do it is to make sure that your knife is sharp, open the book in the centre and just score right down the centre. This way you're keeping the knife away from the spine itself. Once you've done that, your book will open like that and you can open out the spine. So if you take the cover to the back of the spine, and you should be able to carefully then simply score through and remove that part of the text block, and we're going to do the same at the other side. Sometimes it helps if you just pull the paper away from the spine a little bit, give yourself a little bit of room, and just make sure that you're not cutting towards the fabric of the spine itself, but just the paper of the flyleaf that's glued to the text block. That way you've a clean cover without cutting through the spine at all. Just put the text block to one side because we can use that later. So now that we've got our cover all ready, I'm going to cover it in some scrapbooking paper. And I've chosen this paper from a 12×12 scrapbooking pad. And I'm going to just simply cut it down the middle at the 6-inch mark. So with the right sides down, I'm just going to give a liberal covering of Mod Podge and then stick these papers to our journal cover. Just move that out of the way for a minute. Just want to decide which part of the pattern I'm putting on. And I'm sticking it on, leaving about a centimetre gap from the spine. And I'm just going to chop the corners off, leaving a couple of millimetres away from the corners. I'm just going to put a little bit more Mod Podge along the edges just to make sure that it sticks really, really well. And then I'm using a bone folder to fold the scrapbooking papers over. Now this paper is really heavyweight and it isn't easy to get it to fold, so it's a good idea to use a bone folder and just keep working at it until it folds over properly, and then nip the corners in so we get a neat join top and bottom. And just spend a little time making sure that all the edges are well stuck down. It's very hot here at the moment, and so everything is drying very quickly. So there we have our front and back covers. So the next thing I'm going to do is to cut a piece of paper to cover the spine. And I want it to overlap the paper covering a little bit. So I think 9 centimetres should be sufficient. Now, to make sure that it is central, I'm going to find the centre of it, which is 4.5 centimetres. And I'm just going to draw a pencil line right down the centre. And although you can hardly see it, that will help us to line up to the centre of the spine when we glue it on. So the next thing we need to do is to work out where the centre of the spine is. So the next thing to do is to give this a good coat of Mod Podge. However, I'm not going right to the very end because that way we can still see the pencil mark. If we covered it all in Mod Podge, the pencil mark would disappear. We do need to make sure, however, that we Mod Podge at least the length of the spine, if not a little bit more. So we should be able to use our pencil marks on the spine to line this up exactly central. And now I've done that, I'll bring back the non-stick mat and Mod Podge the rest of the paper. And then carefully fold that over into place. This paper's very, very thin and does tear easily, so you do need to take a little bit of care if you're using a thin paper. I like to use a thin paper on the spine because it makes the spine quite neat and smooth. And I like to reinforce the edges of the spine as well. And I'm just going to go over with the bone folder, being careful not to tear the paper at all. So the next thing to do is to decorate up the front cover, and this is the front part of mine, and I'm just going to use a bit of this trimming, and I'm going to stick this on with double-sided sticky tape. I'm just going to lay that on wherever I want it. Make sure it's pressed firmly down and then turn it over. And make sure it's stuck down to the inside. Obviously you can decorate this however you want. I'm going to take a little bit of ephemera and I'm going to mat and layer it. I just want to use some distress ink along the edges. The main reason for it is I didn't particularly like the colour of that paper, and that should just disguise it a little bit. And I'm just going to do the same with the blue. Find that sometimes the colours of the papers in paper stacks can be a little bit in your face. They tend to be a little bit bright for what I like. And again, I'm going to apply these using Mod Podge. And then I'm going to simply leave that to one side to dry. So now we've got the cover done, I'm going to do the spine support for the inside, which is where we're going to attach the signatures to. Now I measured the text block at 3¼ centimetres, and for the spine support I want it to overlap by 5 centimetres. So I'm going to cut a piece of card that I want to sit inside the spine. Now the spine's 24 centimetres, so I'm going to cut it at 23 centimetres deep, so it just sits within the cover of the book. Because I want 5 centimetres overlap at either side, I'm going to cut it at 13¼ centimetres wide. So I want it 23 centimetres deep. And I'm going to cut it 13¼ centimetre wide. I'm now using a scoreboard to score the card at 5 centimetres down one side. And because this is quite thick card, I'm going to flip it over and just score the other side. It makes it easier to fold. Then I'm going to flip it round and again score at 5 centimetres down the other side. And then flip it over and score again. And then when I fold that, that should leave me with a 3¼ centimetre centre section, which should fit quite snugly into the spine. Next I'm going to make a piercing template, so I've cut a piece of paper at 23 centimetres, which is the length of my binding spine, and I'm just going to fold that in half. going to measure the halfway mark, which halfway between 23 centimetres is 11.5, and I'm going to measure 8 centimetres to either side of that, and these are going to be the points where I pierce the signatures as well as the spine piece. I need to find the centre of the spine, and the easiest way to do that is to centre the ruler up and make a mark just in between. I'm just going to draw a line between the two marks. The next job is to decide what papers we want in our signatures, and as this is a junk journal, I'm using some offcuts of scrapbooking paper, some large index cards. I'm using textured paper, old book pages, and some map paper. Now, I usually like to have about 3 signatures with between 4 to 5 leaves in each signature, and we do know that the maximum height of them is 23 centimetres, and we need to decide on a maximum width, which for this one, the book is 15.5 centimetres, so I'm going to do about 14. So anything less than 23 by 14 is fine. Anything any bigger will need to be cut down a little bit. So I'm just going to fold these pieces over and then decide whereabouts I want them to go. And I'm just using a bone folder to reinforce any creases. Of course, these vintage book pages don't need creasing because we're already done, but they will need cutting down. And I may use some of them sideways. And smaller pieces like these, I like to fold them so they're not exactly centred. It just adds a little more interest to the book. And then of course I'm going to come through and trim a lot of these down so they fit the sizes. Now I might trim some smaller than necessary. I might leave some just at 23 centimetres by 14. Some might be 23 centimetres by 12 or 10. It's got to be quite random for it to be effective. So now I have all my sheets cut, it's just a matter of juggling them about until I get them in an order that I like for the signatures. So they're my 3 signatures. Now you want to keep them together and open them up to the centre. Now you can use clips to hold these together, however I do have a long arm stapler, and I'm going to set this, I don't know if you can see, but a stapler has usually 2 different ways of stapling depending on the foot. So you've got the closed staple and an open one, and the open one is temporary. And I'm just going to temporarily fasten these together just to hold them in place until we stitch them. I find this is better than using clips because if you've got pages of different sizes, it can be a little bit awkward to get them all to hold in the right way. So we've got the 3 signatures there ready. Next we're going to take a pad of paper, and I find that the text block that we cut out is ideal for this. And take our pattern and using an awl, just going to punch through the holes in the template. Now we can use that template with each of the signatures, just placing it in the centre. And we can then punch through that as well. And this will make it easy to sew up. Next I'm going to take the spine and I'm just going to place the template on the spine and punch along the centre hole. And then by eye, I'm just going to punch a hole between the centre hole and the fold. Try and measure this, it gets too complicated and it's often better to do it by eye. And I'm going to do the same on the other side and punch halfway between the centre hole and the fold. Obviously, if you're doing more signatures, you need to work out how to space these out. You can use whatever you like to sew it together. You can use thick cotton, you can use cord, you can use embroidery thread. But for this instance, I'm using yarn, and I'm doing this because it's easy to see on video, and you want 3 pieces, each about 3 times the length of the spine. So thread your needle, and I like to start by working on the centre signature, so from the back up to the front, and leave a piece loose at the back. Take your signature and open it out. I'm going to go through the centre hole, then back down through the top hole and through the top hole in the centre of the spine, and just pull that through, turn it over and pull it reasonably tight. We're going to go back through the same hole in the centre then out through the bottom hole. This bit's sometimes a little bit awkward, and through the centre hole in the spine. And again, pull that quite tight, and then run your needle underneath and then tie a knot to secure it in place. Cut off the excess thread and repeat with the remaining 2 signatures. The only thing you do need to watch for is that the signatures are all in the right way up. Through there, pull it tight and fasten off. So there we have our signatures ready to go in to the cover, and we can just offer it up and make sure that it fits in okay. And yes, I'm quite happy with that. So to fasten the pages in, just going to use some double-sided sticky tape along the edges. Notice I'm not putting any tape on the back or too close to the folds. And it's simply a matter of lining up and then folding down the spine. And I like to use my bone folder just to burnish the tape a little bit. The last thing we need to do is to just cut a piece of paper to fit in the back, and we're going to stick that on using Mod Podge, and I'm going to do that at 15 by 23. Just carefully place that on the inner cover. So that's the finished junk journal, ready to be decorated up in any way you choose. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of all our future uploads. Thanks for watching.